The cabin was bright, almost too bright, the kind of lighting that made every expression impossible to hide. I stood just behind my grandfather, one hand gently resting near his back in case he needed support, when the woman in the floral net dress turned toward us like a storm that had been waiting to strike. Her sunglasses, pushed up on her head like a crown she believed she deserved, glinted under the cabin lights as she jabbed her finger toward the seat beside the window. Her voice carried through the quiet, refined space of first class like a blade scraping metal. "This is my seat. I don't know what confusion you two have, but I booked this seat. I fly first class every time, and I'm not moving." My grandfather, Mr. Charles, stood there silently for a moment, his cane lightly tapping the carpeted floor. His boarding pass was still between two fingers, tilted slightly downward, as if he were unsure why it was even needed now. He didn't look angry. He didn't look defensive. He looked tired, the kind of tired that had nothing to do with exhaustion and everything to do with memory, patience, and the weight of knowing that some arguments were older than any of us could measure. I felt the tension gather in my chest as the other passengers in first class glanced up, eyes flicking between us and her with the kind of curiosity that always hovered right before judgment took sides. Just minutes earlier, the airport had felt almost peaceful. The sound of rolling suitcases had echoed across the wide terminal, mixed with the distant voice of an overhead announcement telling passengers to check gate numbers. The smell of roasted coffee from the cafe lingered in the air, and I remember adjusting the strap of my grandfather's bag across my shoulder. He walked slowly beside me, one deliberate step after another, each movement measured. I had grown used to matching my pace to his. It was never a burden. It was a privilege. We had booked this trip months in advance. Not for leisure. Not for luxury. My grandfather had a medical appointment in another state, and long flights were agonizing for him without extra legroom. First class wasn't an indulgence. It was necessity. His joints stiffened painfully when he sat too long, and standing for extended periods was difficult. The seat allowed him to travel with dignity. That dignity mattered more to him than anything he would ever admit out loud. I knew it, even if he never said so. I first noticed the woman behind us at the boarding lane. She had been sighing dramatically, shifting her weight from one foot to the other, as if waiting in line was a personal offense. She had tried to inch forward several times, making impatient little huffs whenever someone didn't move quickly enough. She had the air of someone who believed the world operated incorrectly whenever it wasn't centered around her. When the boarding attendant scanned our tickets and welcomed us aboard, she was already leaning forward, practically breathing down our necks. Everything had been calm until now. But here, in the cabin, something changed the moment she saw my grandfather settle into the seat. Her face twisted, not in confusion, but in disbelief, as if his very presence in first class was an insult to some unspoken social hierarchy she believed she governed. She placed her large purse aggressively into the overhead compartment above his seat with a thud that made the compartment door rattle. Then she turned, blocking the aisle, claiming ownership. I stepped forward calmly. "Ma'am, this is seat 2A. We have the boarding passes right here." She waved her hand as if swatting away a fly. "He doesn't need that much space," she said, voice dripping condescension. "Look at him. He should be sitting somewhere where someone can help him. The front row is wasted on someone who can barely move." My grandfather's hand tightened slightly on the handle of his cane. Not enough that anyone else would have noticed. But I saw it. An old pain. An old insult. One that he had spent a lifetime learning to swallow. "Ma'am," I repeated, keeping my tone controlled, "we paid for these seats. They're assigned. It's not about space or preference. These are ours." She let out a laugh that didn't sound amused at all. "Oh, please. I've flown on this airline for 12 years. I know how these things work. Sometimes they switch people, especially when older passengers need medical assistance. It makes more sense for me to be here. I have a business conference to attend. I cannot be cramped in the back with everyone else. I can't believe you're making this an issue." I could feel the eyes of the cabin watching more closely now. The woman was loud enough that her words traveled. The flight attendant nearby, a young woman trying to maintain a professional smile, approached with cautious steps. She looked from Sarah to us with uncertainty. Not authority, not confidence, just hesitation. "Is there a problem here?" the flight attendant asked, voice polite but tense. "Yes, there is," the woman insisted before I could speak. "These two took my seat. He should be in assisted seating or regular seating, not up here. I have priority status with this airline. I will not be displaced." The flight attendant looked at us. "May I see your boarding passes, sir?" I handed both passes to her without hesitation. She checked them. Her eyes confirmed what we knew, but her training kept her expression carefully neutral. "These seats are theirs," she said softly. The woman shook her head, lips tightening. No, I don't accept that. I need to speak to someone else. Someone who actually understands flight status regulations. This is ridiculous." Her voice rose, and with it, the tension in the cabin tightened like a drawn wire. My grandfather finally spoke, his voice quiet, measured, almost too soft to hear. "I don't want trouble," he said. "We just want to sit and travel like everyone else." Something about his tone made the situation feel heavier. It was the tone of someone who had already endured enough in life that arguments like this no longer held novelty. They were simply exhausting. The woman scoffed, folding her arms. "Well, I want fairness. And I'm not giving up my seat just because he got here first. He should be in a seat that suits his condition. It's common sense." My jaw tightened. There it was. The entitlement. The dismissal. The presumption of superiority that needed no logic to justify itself. The flight attendant stepped aside, clearly uncertain how to escalate. The surrounding passengers were silent, caught between discomfort and curiosity. And I knew right then that this wasn't going to resolve with polite explanations. She wasn't interested in fairness or reason. She wanted control. She wanted to be right. I looked at my grandfather. His eyes met mine. They were steady, calm, but shadowed with a sadness I couldn't ignore. That was the moment I understood. This wasn't just about a plain seat. It was about dignity. And there was no universe in which I was going to let someone take that from him. The cabin air felt still, as if the entire plane was waiting to see what would happen next. The confrontation had just begun. The flight attendant stood there for a moment, as though the floor beneath her had become far more fragile than the carpet suggested. She gave a small nod, as if trying to reassure herself before reassuring us, and then stepped away to speak quietly with another member of the crew. The woman in the floral net dress, Sarah, crossed her arms in a tight, rigid fold across her chest, the posture of someone who believed immovable stubbornness counted as strength. She kept her stance angled toward my grandfather, as though sheer proximity might intimidate him into giving up the seat. My grandfather lowered himself carefully, settling into the cushion, his cane resting lightly against his leg. He moved slowly, deliberately, not in fear or submission, but in preservation. His silence wasn't weakness, it was understanding. Understanding that his breath, his strength, his patience, all needed to be rationed. He had lived long enough to know which moments deserved his energy, and which did not. But I could see the flicker of discomfort in his posture, the subtle tension in his shoulders. He felt observed, judged, devalued. I took the seat beside him, placing his bag gently under the seat in front of me. The woman hovered still in the aisle, refusing to move. She angled her chin toward my grandfather and let out another sigh, louder this time, directed more at the audience she was building than at either of us. "Look at this," she said to no one in particular, but loud enough so everyone could hear. "This is what happens when entitlement is rewarded. I'm being treated like I'm the bad person, and I've done nothing wrong. I'm the one being disrespected here." The accusation hung in the air, not because anyone believed it, but because everyone recognized the tactic. If she repeated it often enough, perhaps someone would agree. I turned slightly toward her and kept my voice steady. "We're not doing this. You know these aren't your seats. You saw us board before you. You know your boarding pass doesn't say 2A. She blinked rapidly, the kind of blinking that came not from confusion, but fury. I travel frequently. I have priority. That means if seats need to be adjusted, I am the one who gets the upgrade. It's how this works. Maybe you're new to flying. Before I could respond, she reached into her purse and pulled out her phone, holding it up at an angle that captured her own face prominently while keeping us in the frame. She spoke into it with a sudden, dramatic tremor in her voice. This is what I have to deal with when I travel alone. People taking advantage of airline policies, pretending they need special accommodation. I don't feel safe right now. I'm being verbally harassed. The accusation was so far removed from reality that for a moment I simply stared at her, stunned. Not because she was lying, but because she was skilled at it. She had weaponized performance. She spoke as though she had been practicing this exact script for years, rehearsing for moments when accountability threatened her perception of herself. But she had made a mistake. She thought deception and volume were the same as power. She assumed audience meant loyalty. The woman seated across the aisle, who had been pretending to read a magazine, lowered it halfway. A man 2 rows behind leaned forward slightly. A couple near the back of the cabin exchanged quiet glances. The atmosphere shifted. Awareness sharpened. The performance had drawn attention, but not sympathy. I leaned closer to my grandfather and spoke quietly, so only he could hear. "Are you okay?" He nodded once. The nod wasn't casual, it was controlled. His dignity, his sense of self, was still steady. But I could see the exhaustion tracing the edges of his eyes. He didn't fear this woman. He feared the possibility that this situation might spiral further, into conflict, into humiliation, into some structural inconvenience that would force him to defend his right to exist in peace. A different flight attendant approached, this one older, more experienced, with a poise that suggested years of handling situations just like this. She offered a professional but firm tone, the kind that attempted diplomacy without surrender. "Ma'am," she said, addressing Sarah directly, "I need to see your boarding pass." Sarah handed it over with exaggerated reluctance, sighing again, exhaling loudly enough to ensure everybody noticed the martyrdom she believed she was embodying. The flight attendant examined the pass. A pause. A flicker of acknowledgement. She handed it back, her voice calm. "Your seat is in row 14. The words didn't sound negotiable. They sounded definitive. Sarah shook her head once, sharply. "No. That must be a mistake. Check again. I was told I would be upgraded." "Ma'am," the flight attendant repeated, "your assigned seat is in row 14. There is no upgrade recorded in the system." Sarah's face flushed a deeper shade of red. "Well, then fix it. Clearly, there's been an error. I shouldn't have to sit back there. That row is cramped. I have circulation issues. I bruise easily. I need the space more than he does. You people are being unbelievably insensitive right now, and frankly, discriminatory." The word discriminatory landed with force in the air, designed to jar and provoke. She was casting herself as the oppressed party, twisting reality inside out. This was not a conflict of logic. It was a conflict of narrative. If she could make her story louder than ours, she believed she could win. But she didn't realize that every person in first class had witnessed her behavior long before her phone came out. The flight attendant's expression remained controlled. "We will not be discussing this further right now. Please take your assigned seat so we may continue boarding and prepare for takeoff." Sarah stayed rooted, unmoving. "No," she said simply. One syllable, cold and absolute. This was the moment I understood something important. She didn't want a seat. She wanted control. She wanted the scene, the attention, the validation that came from overpowering someone she thought weaker. My grandfather shifted slightly, his cane tapping once again against the floor. The sound was soft, but it drew my attention back to him immediately. His hands rested in his lap, fingers gently intertwined. He looked forward, not at her, not at the flight attendants, not at the other passengers. He looked straight ahead, as though the only way to withstand humiliation was to refuse to acknowledge its intent. His silence wasn't surrender. His silence was grace. I took a slow breath, steadying myself. A peaceful approach had failed not because it was the wrong choice, but because it was never an option she was willing to accept. This wasn't a conversation. It was a power struggle. And we were done playing by her rules. I turned my head toward a man seated 2 rows back. He had already raised his phone. His camera was recording not manipulated angles, not selective edits, but the situation exactly as it was. He met my gaze and nodded once. Another passenger across the aisle raised her brow at me in a silent offer. "Do you want me to speak up?" "Not yet. Not now. Not while the tension still held shape." I leaned back slightly in my seat and spoke just loud enough for Sarah and the surrounding passengers to hear. "Okay," I said. "If you'd like to continue, we'll document everything. Full context. Every witness. Every word. Then we'll let customer relations review the footage. And if you're right, you'll have nothing to worry about." Sarah's expression faltered, just briefly. Just enough. For the first time, she realized that attention alone might not protect her. The plane sat still, suspended in that breath before consequences begin. The air inside the cabin felt still, as though every breath taken was measured and monitored. The tension had sharpened into something with an edge. Sarah's posture stiffened, her shoulders squared, the floral pattern of her dress shifting sharply as she tried to regain the authority she believed she had just lost. She lowered her phone slightly, hesitating between continuing the performance or reassessing her audience. Her eyes flickered from passenger to passenger, searching for affirmation, for someone, anyone, to nod in agreement with her narrative. But silence held its ground. Not supportive silence. Watchful silence. My grandfather remained seated, his hands resting in his lap, fingers gently lined together. He was the only one whose breathing seemed calm. A quiet dignity radiated from him, not as an act, not as a defense, but as a simple truth of who he was. His calm did not come from weakness. It came from having survived moments far worse than this. And yet, I could see the faint shadow behind his eyes, the subtle ache of being forced to defend his right to something he had already earned, paid for, and deserved. A senior flight supervisor soon arrived, moving with the composed confidence of someone accustomed to being the final voice in a dispute. She had the crisp poise of authority, every step measured, every expression controlled. Her uniform was immaculate, and the way she looked between us and Sarah suggested she had already been briefed. No confusion, no hesitation, just evaluation. "Ma'am," the supervisor said, her tone even but unequivocal, "I understand there has been a disagreement about seating." Sarah straightened, relief blooming in her tone as she cut in quickly, eager to reassert her position. "Yes, thank you. Finally, someone who can actually handle this. They are in my seat. I was told I would be upgraded. He doesn't need to be up here. He clearly needs medical assistance, not first class. There must be a mistake." The supervisor did not react to the dismissal. She simply extended her hand. "May I see your boarding pass, please?" The pass was already in Sarah's hand, pinched tightly between 2 fingers, as if part of a weapon she had intended to use. She handed it over with a brittle confidence, her smile forced and thin. The supervisor studied it. Her eyes didn't flicker. Her posture didn't shift. When she looked up again, the decision was already made. This boarding pass is for row 14. That seat is located in economy. There is no upgrade documented under your reservation. No seat reassignment. No status change. Sarah blinked, then shook her head firmly, rapidly, as though denial itself could rearrange reality. "No, that is not correct. I have priority status. I always get upgraded. I should be in first class. You need to move him." She pointed directly at my grandfather, the gesture sharp and invasive, as if he were an obstacle rather than a person. "He's too old to travel up here safely. That's a liability for the airline." My grandfather's eyes lifted. There was no anger in them, but something quieter, something harder to judge, disappointment. The weight of it was heavier than anger could ever be. The supervisor's voice did not raise, but it gained firmness. "We do not relocate passengers based on age, assumption, or one customer's personal preferences. He is seated in the seat printed on his ticket. You are not. Sarah's lips parted, drawing in a breath meant for another protest, another tirade. But before she could speak, the man 2 rows behind us, still recording, leaned forward enough for his presence to be unmistakable. His voice was calm, almost casual. I've recorded the entire interaction, including when she attempted to remove his luggage from the overhead and claimed the seat was hers. If the airline needs evidence, I'm happy to provide it. Another passenger, the woman with the magazine, lowered it again. Same here. I saw everything. The supervisor regarded the passengers, and what had previously been hesitation transformed into certainty. Witnesses had spoken. The story had been decided. Sarah exhaled sharply, the desperation beginning to bleed through her entitlement. Are you seriously going to take their side? Are you really doing this? I fly with this airline constantly. I am a valued customer. I spend real money on premium service. The supervisor did not blink. Ma'am, attempting to take another passenger's assigned seat is a violation of airline conduct policy. Continuing to disrupt boarding is grounds for removal from the flight. The word removal struck the air like a dropped weight. The cabin held still. Sarah froze, eyes wide, not with fear, but disbelief. This was not how her world worked. She was accustomed to being the exception, to making demands and having them fulfilled, to bending rules around her voice. You can't be serious, she said, her voice shrinking, thinning. I paid for my ticket. You can't just. You will be rebooked on a later flight, the supervisor continued. If you do not comply, airport security will escort you from the aircraft. It is your choice. Passengers watched not with cruelty, but with a quiet recognition of accountability, something rarely seen in moments like this. Something almost sacred. Justice without spectacle. Sarah's gaze darted around the cabin, searching again for a supporter, for someone to speak on her behalf, for one person willing to say she was right. No one did. Even her phone had been lowered, her recording now useless. Without the audience she relied upon to rewrite the truth. This is unbelievable, she whispered, voice cracking, not with sympathy, but humiliation. This is ridiculous. I'm the victim here. This is discrimination against people who travel frequently. You clearly don't understand how things work. But the supervisor simply gestured toward the aisle. Ma'am, please gather your belongings. The silence that followed felt slow, thick, weighted. Sarah's movements were jerky, clumsy now, her hands no longer graceful or self-assured. She retrieved her bag from the overhead compartment, but her grip faltered, and the bag slipped slightly. A passenger stepped forward instinctively as if to help, and she recoiled sharply, as though assistance was an insult. Her footsteps down the aisle were not loud, but the memory of them would be. The cabin door closed behind her with a finality that did not need emphasis. Once she was gone, the air shifted. The tension loosened. Conversations resumed in low tones. A few passengers glanced toward my grandfather, not staring, not pitying, just acknowledging him. A nod, a soft smile, a gesture of recognition. The supervisor turned to my grandfather and spoke not with formality now, but respect. Sir, on behalf of the crew, I apologize for the disruption. If there is anything we can do to make your flight more comfortable, please let us know. My grandfather inclined his head slightly. Thank you, he said. Simple, honest. The flight attendant offered additional pillows and adjusted his seating angle. The small acts felt meaningful not because of the items themselves, but because of the intention behind them. As the plane finally began its taxi toward the runway, I glanced at my grandfather. He looked forward again, but this time without the shadow in his eyes. Instead, there was a quiet strength, a sense of restored balance. I leaned back into my seat, letting the hum of the engines settle around us. The conflict had ended not with shouting, not with force, but with truth revealed in front of those who needed to see it. It was not about revenge. It was about dignity returning to where it always belonged. And as the plane lifted into the sky, leaving the terminal behind us, there was a calm I could finally breathe into, a stillness earned, not granted. The world did not always correct itself. But sometimes, when the right moment met the right witnesses, it did.